So for those that are just joining, my name is Andy Fernandez. I'm the GM of AI and Cyber here at HYCU. And I'm particularly passionate about this subject. Obviously, many events happening in the world. We won't get into why or how these events are unraveling, but we will talk about its impact on IT systems, its impact on systems of record, and what are some of the key areas that you can do within the EU to protect your data as well. So with that, I think we've got most people joining us. Let's get started. Rethinking data sovereignty in Europe. I want to talk to you about the story or kind of the evolution that the majority of our customers have gone through here at Haiku. And what we've noticed was that there has been a massive, massive change in how applications are hosted, managed, protected, stored, and which has very, very large impacts on sovereignty and data residency for EU organizations. If we time travel 20 years ago, even 15 years ago, the majority of the applications and the data and the systems of record that your organization used were all sitting within a data center. And although that came with its own challenges, it was very straightforward from a data protection perspective, from a residency perspective, because you owned it. It was in your real estate, it was in your control. Every single application lived there. That evolution we saw first start with public cloud, where at first it was, hey, this is a very cost effective way to store data long term. But organizations started to really modernize and start to leverage cloud services, native solutions in the cloud. This brought up an entirely different conversation when it came to data sovereignty and residency within the EU. But one of the biggest risk factors that we've seen is not just this real maturity and adoption of public cloud, but it's also the explosion of SaaS applications. So the amount of systems that were self-hosted that are now subscribed to as a service have a very, very, very big impact within sovereignty as well. So when we look at the average organization today, and we have thousands of conversations with our customers, your organization, potentially you are still running on VMware, but you are thinking about a move to another hypervisor. Maybe your organization is also in the same time adopting one or most likely two public clouds. And you for sure have a very, very, very large number of SaaS applications. In fact, in a previous survey, we found that the average mid-size organization had over 150 SaaS applications. Now you might be thinking, well, yes, we have Microsoft, we have Salesforce. What other possible SaaS applications do we have? Well, just think even within development, Git repositories, CI/CD, ticket management systems, applications like Workday from an HR perspective, financial service applications, document management systems. Once you start to really evaluate your organization, you'll find that you have so many different SaaS applications. So we go from a everything living in a monolith to a fully heterogeneous, decentralized environment. And that brings a lot of benefits and scale and some of the best technologies in the world, but it makes life a little bit complicated in two senses. One, from a cyber resilience perspective, but of course, from a sovereignty and residency perspective as well. Within that same survey that I mentioned to you, we found that the majority of the organizations that have a heavy SaaS footprint experience some form of security incident. And they experience some form of disruption for these SaaS applications, where they had an average disruption of over $400,000 with a disruption period over 5 working days. Now, you may be thinking, and the general reaction that everybody has is, well, the reason that we are no longer self-hosting is because we are offloading our security and availability responsibilities to the vendor. That is correct. But that doesn't mean that the vendor cannot suffer a supply chain incident. That doesn't mean the vendor can't suffer an outage. And that doesn't mean that you, as an organization using an instance of that application, make a mistake that leads to data loss. And that shared responsibility model is a very, very, very important concept. But there's another reason why this is so important. And this kind of heterogeneous environment that I'm showing you is so, so important in today's world, right? There's so many things going on from a geopolitical perspective where you're seeing this push within the EU to be able to say, hey, can we use EU applications? Can we store and make sure everything is processed within the EU? And can we keep control and even have portability of our data in case we really want to do it? We're seeing fragmentation in the world on top of fragmented technology stacks that your organization needs to think about. So our conversation today for the next few minutes is essentially going to be around some of the key areas to think about, and specifically how having the wrong data protection solution can introduce data residency challenges, and having the right data protection solution will actually give you the ability to keep control of a lot of these applications that you previously did not have control of. So when we talk to CIOs, we have a very, very straightforward and very simple conversation around the three I's. The three I's of what you have to protect within your organization. Are you protecting your infrastructure? Whether that is hybrid environment, you are staying in a data center, maybe you're repatriating to a data center, or you're running a multi-cloud ecosystem. You have to protect your infrastructure. And everyone pretty much does a good job at protecting their infrastructure. Then you have to protect your identities. These are the first path of an attack many times, right? A lot of whether it was MGM or Caesars, a lot of the times misconfigurations, not being able to go back to a certain time within your identity posture can be very, very dangerous. So being able to protect your identity configurations of your workforce, of your customers, of your cloud services is very, very important. And the piece that we're really going to focus on in today is your intellectual property and the applications that your business runs on. And there's some very, very significant reasons why we have to look at this because it's the most unprotected area of your business. It is the most unprotected. And the reason I'm so confident saying that is because there are so few options to protect a lot of this intellectual property. Microsoft 365, Salesforce, there are data protection vendors out there that can help you. But what about Box? What about GitLab? What about Jira, Confluence, GitHub, iManage, Box? You name it. These are so many different applications that need to be protected as well. Based and also the data needs to be controlled. So if you're thinking about data sovereignty and residency, there's so many dependencies, there's so many things to think about, but a very easy way to approach it within the organization, whether you're a financial services customer or not, is to think about it in the context of DORA. The Digital Operational Resilience Act is probably one of the more cutting edge pieces of legislation within the EU. And this mandate, and the reason this mandate came to be, and it's actually a very interesting letter from the heads of the EU when they released DORA, it was to combat this incredible dependence on a few SaaS applications that we have within our supply chain. And the reason was for the EU to make sure that financial institutions or companies serving these financial institutions are able to make sure that if something happens to the supply chain of SaaS applications and cloud services, if Azure, if AWS, if Salesforce goes down, are those companies and are those financial institutions ready, available, and do they have a plan to keep control of their data if something were to happen? All of this was written before any of the geopolitical characteristics of our time today. And the advice that they provide is actually excellent. So even if you're not a financial institution, maybe you're following these two because you're within the 15 verticals, the DORA requirements are actually very interesting, and I highly recommend that you take a look at it within your organization. But there's a couple of things that I want to highlight within DORA. The first one's Article 12. And there's two things within Article 12 that I want to highlight. But first of all, is that they mandate backup policies. But they're not just mandating backup policies for what you've always backed up, right? You have backups of your VMs, your file shares, your cloud instances. You've been doing this for years. But all of the other ICTs or SaaS systems or cloud services out there, they might not have a backup, but DORA is mandating that you have backup policies and procedures in place for that. And in fact, you also want to make sure that you have logical separation and you have the ability to restore and access those services. So, if we remember back in the day, we always talked about the 3-2-1 rule, right? 3 copies of data, 2 media types, 1 offsite. We take that for granted on-prem. That hasn't really existed in cloud and SaaS because you are dependent on one specific cloud provider. So you can't therefore be offsite. Your SaaS applications might not have all of these capabilities. So it's very, very important to understand that being able to take a backup of your data, store it in your control, keep access of it, even be able to read it is a very, very critical step when it comes to data sovereignty and specifically on data residency. But as you think through, and there's so many dependencies, many of you have very different tech stacks, very different sectors. Many of you might not even be in the EU on this call today, but it doesn't matter because a lot of these are fundamentals that are going to be very, very, very helpful. So one of the things that I wanted to mention was there's a couple of considerations you want to take when you're protecting a lot of your workloads in your organization. Remember the 3 I's, your infrastructure, your identities, and your IP. Let's talk a little bit about data control within the EU. There are many organizations that are looking at the world right now. They have production systems in a certain public cloud, or they have, colo facilities, they have many data centers, and they're thinking about what happens if there's another political incident, war, it doesn't matter. One of the key considerations here is, do you have the ability to move your infrastructure from one place to another? If you are running everything in AWS or in Azure or Google Cloud, can you move to another public cloud? Can you move back down on-prem? Do you have the ability to do that in a way that it's not disrupted, in a way that's productive? So having cross-platform mobility is a very, very big factor today, especially now after, the Broadcom era. So many organizations realize that they have so much dependence on one vendor. Many folks are saying, hey, that's not going to happen again. We're going to diversify. We're going to leverage an alternate hypervisor and cloud, but I want to make sure that I always have mobility in play. So cross-platform mobility is very, very important when it comes to your infrastructure. But let's shift over to your SaaS applications, and your cloud infrastructure as well. Do you have access during an outage? It's a very, very straightforward question. And many times you think, well, I have only experienced a few outages within the public clouds. They have the five nines. We should be okay. But we all know that it happens, and it happens more than we think. But it's not just the public cloud having an outage. Remember, these SaaS applications that you're using also are subscribed to these public clouds. So I'm going to give you an example. There was a US East outage in the US about 4 years ago within AWS. And in that outage, obviously there was massive disruption. It impacted airports. It impacted everyone within that region. And what we also noticed was that even services like Atlassian Cloud were running in AWS. And customers who were running or leveraging Atlassian Cloud, and they use that every single day for their business, whether for knowledge management or for IP, source code, repositories, it doesn't matter. They depended on it. And that was also down, and they had no access to that. And there were even cases where organizations had permanent data loss as well. So that question is very simple, but very important. If something were to happen to your email systems, if something were to happen to your document management systems, if something were to happen to your financial and HR applications, do you have access to that data if there's an outage? And the other piece too is the cyber crime has really shifted away from, hey, we're just looking to encrypt and focus on organizations and take them one at a time, to a lot of supply chain compromise, right? If I'm able to actually go after a cloud service provider, am I able to go after a cloud vendor, then I have much more leverage and much more to gain if I'm able to exploit them. So supply chain compromises are critical. If somebody within one of these vendors makes a mistake, or one of these vendors is compromised, you also have to think, do I have a well-known copy of my data and my configurations, that even if something were to happen to the source, that I know that I have a source of truth available to me as well. And the other piece is, can you read that data? It's not just about saying, hey, I have a backup here, it's proprietary, I can use it to restore once that system goes up. But what are you doing for those hours or potentially days where your organization might be disrupted? For example, if your organization is running research and all of your research is stored in files inside a Box, if Box goes down and no one can access Box, that means your organization is not essentially working, right? Because you can't access a lot of these core information in IP. And that applies to any SaaS application that you have. So being able to read that data is very, very critical. But here's the other piece where sometimes people get in trouble, where you might already be doing an excellent job on understanding your residency requirements, understanding your governance requirements. But a lot of the times protecting protecting your SaaS applications. And there are not that many options out there in the past. And many of the times you would have to subscribe to a managed storage, and you would subscribe to this vendor. And all of a sudden, you're following all the rules for your organization, but your backup provider is running, and the data is being processed in the US or in another country in the EU. The data is being stored by them in their control, not in your residency, not in your control. So another big question here is, when you're protecting a lot of these critical data, if you've already made the choice to do so, are you storing and processing that data within the same regions and according to your governance and residency requirements as well? So these are some of the very, very important considerations, especially today. And it all comes down to, can I move my infrastructure and data if I need to? Can I access it? Can I read it? And is the mechanism that I'm trusting to protect my data running within my infrastructure, within my region, and within my organization? So with that, I want to show you for a few minutes how Haiku is able to help you solve this. So, for those hearing about Haiku for the first time, we are the fastest growing data protection vendor in the industry. We have over 4,800 organizations in over 78 countries, and we will work with all of the infrastructure that makes sense to your organization. Enterprises all over the world, many in the EU, trust us with the crown jewels of their environments to be able to protect. Now, one of the key things that I want to talk about here, first of all, is when it comes to finding a data protection vendor that you can trust, we've been named a de facto leader by many of these organizations, whether it's IDC, GigaOM, and Gartner. You want to make sure that you choose a data protection vendor that you trust. But let's get to the biggest value add here, the ability to actually go and protect your infrastructure, your IP, and your identities as well. There are over 100 workloads that are protected by Haiku. One of the major gaps that we fill is, of course, there's an excellent vendors out there protecting infrastructure, whether that's cloud or on-prem, but very, very gapped when it comes to protecting all of your SaaS applications, right? So we have over 100 of those workloads, many times more than the rest of the competition. But what I really want to focus on is kind of systematically addressing these challenges. You would be surprised if I asked you how many SaaS applications you have within your organization. You would probably give me a number. We would probably go back to your team. We would work together, and that number might be a lot larger. And so the average organization that we see has over 150 SaaS applications. So what we're noticing now is that the first thing that a lot of organizations need to know is, well, what are the actual applications that I'm running? In what department? And are those applications actually protected? If there's an audit, if there's an incident, do I have a way to go into that application and read, access, and recover my data? And what Haiku is able to do to help you is actually give you a service within our cloud for free where you're able to visualize this and actually kind of build a structured map of your organization to say, hey, here are all my departments, here are all the applications that those departments are using. And then now we're going to know, does that application have a self-service restore? Does it have backup automation for me? Can I store it somewhere? So, for example, if you're using or if you are subscribing to Dora and you have to follow those requirements, then this gives you a full blueprint to triage for risk. But that's just understanding the problem. The other piece is, can you automate data protection at scale? Can you say, look, it doesn't matter what ICT it is, what SaaS application it is, or cloud infrastructure. I want to know that if I sign a policy, that it's going to work and I don't have to manage it. What you'll find in many organizations is if you move to public cloud, you might be leveraging native scripts. And that's okay at the beginning, but as your organization grows, you now have a very custom backup solution in Azure, a custom backup solution in AWS, and a bunch of different tools within SaaS. This gives you an ability to standardize your RPOs within your organization, to standardize your RTOs and be able to say, look, we have a global policy for IP, critical IP. We want to take a backup for 4 hours. Please do it across all of these applications. That's something that we're able to do. But most importantly, backup is will give you the most flexibility because you have the ability to say, I would like to take a backup every day or every 30 minutes. You choose how often, and then more importantly, you choose how long it's retained as well. And of course, it will work at scale for your organization. But what's most critical for today is this residency conversation. One of the key differentiators for Haiku, especially organizations in the EU, is the ability to run Haiku within your environment, which means that you can process the data within your residency and store the backups in your control in an S3 compatible storage that makes sense for your organization. So it's a very, very critical point here. When you are evaluating vendors for cloud and SaaS backup, you are leveraging their storage. And they dictate what that storage requirement is. And then they tell you, hey, you can back this up at this price, or they'll change the rules on you. Here, you run Haiku as you see fit. You store the data as you see fit. Everything's encrypted. It's stored in your cloud account. You have full control of data residency across the life cycle of the backup. Data will never leave your residency. You choose the storage flexibility that makes sense for you. And of course, you can even choose European S3 storage targets as well. So the piece here is think of Haiku as an encrypted highway that goes and helps you protect all of these critical applications, but then you're able to also make sure that you keep full control. So from a residency perspective, this is very, very critical. But a very important capability here, especially for these SaaS applications, is because it's in your control, in an S3 compatible storage bucket that you own. If there's an outage of any of those SaaS applications, you have the ability to export that data in a readable format. So let's say there is a prolonged outage. Let's say that there is a supply chain incident and you don't have access to GitHub for a few days or to Box or to SharePoint. You have the ability to still go and read and access your IP outside of the service because you are in control of the data. And that means that you have a lot more options when it comes to resilience within your organization as well. So it's something that's very, very important. So when we look at how we approach this, there are organizations that will provide you some data residency options for a specific application that they protect, but they're not doing it for the scope of applications. You need to look at your data estate, not, well, today I'm going to back up Salesforce, and in 3 months we're going to back up this. It's being able to protect everything from one place. Our BYOS model, our bring your own storage model, is going to help you meet those sovereignty and residency requirements. You have true ransomware protection, and you have the ability to control and avoid paying a lot of these overpriced fees when it comes to data protection as well. And for those who are actually thinking through, maybe I can use HYCU from a DORA perspective, you can meet compliance requirements very easily because one, you're standardizing HYCU across the board. You have all of your applications with documented policies in a documented storage location that's offsite, that's in your control, that you have full control of. You can perform validation tests, resilience tests. Everything is logged. So you have auditability of every single event, every task that was created. And of course, you can automate absolutely everything. So you're not spending a lot of time on this. And most importantly, for today's conversation, the data is processed, the data is run inside of your residency requirements. That's a very, very important piece where sometimes data protection can be an asset, sometimes it can be a liability. And so our focus is to make sure that you can run everything within your organization as well. So if you have any questions, please let me know. What I'm also going to be included in the chat here, my colleague will add it, is we've created a DORA compliance checklist that breaks down all of the requirements when it comes to data protection, incident response, demonstrable recovery. And it kind of gives you an idea of what you need to do to be able to prove DORA compliance. And it's going to be very, very helpful. The other thing that I'm going to add is a link to the marketplace, because you might be thinking, well, my environment's very different. Let me see what HYCU is able to help me with. I'm also adding a link to our marketplace as well, so that you can see the 100 plus applications that are protected by HYCU at this point in time. So with that, I want to thank you all for your time, for your attention. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to email us back. We're going to send you a recording of this, but we really appreciate your time in this brief discussion, and we hope you have an excellent day.